Good morning, folks. Hi, Mark. This is Mark Guerringue. He is a publisher of the local newspaper and a few others. And I am Tom McLaughlin, former columnist and, I don't know, conservative pundit. Would that fit me? I suppose it would, yeah. And here it is. It's June 9th, 2021, Wednesday at about 10 o'clock. And as usual, we're going to go over the issues of the day beginning with questions from our producer. Neither of us has seen these questions or know what they are. And for that matter, some of these talking points I haven't shared with you. But it'll kind of be the same as what Bill does. And probably they match up. They almost always do.
I don't have a piece of paper in front of me, so
okay, good.
Fire away.
All right. This one, question one says, do you think an infrastructure bill is needed? And if so, do you approve of President Biden's $1 trillion price tag, lowered from $2 trillion? You want that?
Well, I was just looking at this set. I know Bill has built this set, and it's sort of like an old farmhouse scene. And I just noticed that your window's crooked in back.
Oh,
so it's like a classic old barn.
Uh-oh.
You know, the window's just a little
bad carpentry, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway. I think the short answer is that I think everybody knows is that the Republicans and Democrats have wanted some sort of infrastructure bill forever, right? And whether it's on any Republican or Democratic administration, and it never gets done for whatever reason. The Democrats want to spend the money, the Republicans don't. The Republicans get in. Trump touted a big infrastructure bill, and it never happened. I'm not sure why. I think he just put his energy someplace else. I guess that would be a fair statement. So, and Biden came along and wants to have, this bipartisanship, and he started off with the 2.3 trillion, and I guess he's down to whatever it is, 1 trillion or something. And the Republicans, from my perspective, it's a fair number. I mean, I always go back to this, is that
a trillion is a fair number.
Yeah. Whether it's a trillion and a half, part of it's the actual money, part of it what it's for. So the actual money is that I always remind my conservative friends that Trump chalked up a $3.5 trillion deficit before the pandemic. So this $1.5 trillion, or whatever it is, 1.3, is not just 1 year. It's spent over 8 or 10 years. So in terms of real money, it's not as much as, you have to keep in perspective of what that amount is. And I think that, who knows, but I think that chopping it down to half of what Biden originally wanted seems fair in the world of compromise. And I think I know the Republicans want that, but McConnell's back the way he was with Obama. He's just not going to do anything to help Biden. He's going to block every legislation, and that seems to be what's playing out.
Okay. You think McConnell's motivation is to block Biden? Why would he want to block Biden?
Why? Why did he want to block Obama? He just wants to. He wants to, and obviously McConnell, you got to hand it to him. He's all about politics. It's all about politics. I mean, it's always about politics, but he's like the puppet master of politics. So, at the same time, on the day after the insurrection, he blamed Trump, and now he's not. So it's all about where the wind is blowing, and it's obviously in the Republicans' interest to have the Democrats fail in broad terms, and not passing an infrastructure bill would be a failure.
So he would put avoiding granting any kind of victories, or even if it benefits the country, to an administration that's Democrat, he would rather hurt the country than to do that.
That's what it appears. I mean, one is you have to say hurt. You're saying not. If you say it hurt, I guess you could. I thought you were going to argue that we don't need the infrastructure bill.
I am going to argue that.
Okay, so if you're saying he believes we don't need it, then I respect that more than, but I don't. I think Republicans, generally Republicans have supported an infrastructure bill. Trump talked about it. The Republicans talked about it and it didn't happen, so I have to assume they haven't changed any. The Republicans haven't changed.
The only thing I remember about Trump's proposals were that there were more than this, but the only thing I remember was internet and more broadband across more of the country, which would help spur business development in any area where it didn't prior exist, and then it were built by government. Now, the other thing was, you said Trump ran up $3.5 trillion in deficits. Did you mean debt?
Yeah.
Okay, so deficit the word would apply year to year, in a budget. In other words, if you propose a budget for 5 trillion and the taxes are only going to be bring in 4 trillion, then you're running $1 trillion deficit for that year. And debt is the accumulation of annual deficits to where we're approaching $30 trillion in debt. So you're saying, what you meant to say was that Trump added $3.5 trillion to the debt.
Correct.
Okay, I'm not sure. That's a higher number than I have heard.
Well, but
of course, he's been out for
yeah.
For half a year, and so I suppose the statistics would be in by now. So anyway, whatever. But what is infrastructure? That's the key thing.
Yeah.
Now, just this morning, I read a claim by Republican leaders in Congress that only 13% of what Biden proposes would be roads and bridges and hard infrastructure that you can touch. And the rest of it, they would say, is a welfare bill disguised as infrastructure. And, child care, education, is that infrastructure? Well, I guess you could make a case that.
Well, Democrats call it human infrastructure.
Yes, okay, but it's pretty classic Democrat proposals, going back 50 years. This is what Johnson would do when he came in with his Great Society, and Carter, and what Clinton would do, Obama would trying to do. And it resembles more social spending kind of stuff. And should government do infrastructure? Well, the biggest, we had canal systems in the early part of our country, until railroads came along and supplanted canals for moving goods. And so was the federal government involved in that? The Erie Canal, that was New York State. That was all within New York State. That was a big job. And they tended to be more state projects than they were as federal. The federal government tended not to get involved, as I recall. But with railroads, it did. The Transcontinental Railroad, that was post-Civil War, the late 1860s and 70s. Then the federal government did subsidize that. Now, I read, and some say, oh, look what it did. Look what it did for business, and it did improve business. But the question that sticks in my mind is, would it have happened privately, even if the federal government didn't do it? And I've read some pretty convincing articles, because you never know what would have happened. You're always on shaky ground when you project that way. But it was pretty convincing. There was enough private capital to do it. And could they made money? Certainly they did. The Union Pacific Railroad made a lot of money. And other smaller railroads in other regions did too. So.
Would you have supported that's an Ayn Randian proposition that everything should be left up to the free market.
Yeah.
But I think over time, it's just a fact that government has always been involved with the greater good of this country, like it or not. We have the Hoover Dam. We wouldn't have LA. We wouldn't have Imperial Valley without the Hoover Dam.
LA?
Los Angeles. The whole Southern California basin is based on all the irrigation system. That's all federal money. Can you imagine now with your approach, can you imagine what the politics would be now if a president came out and said, like Eisenhower did, and said, Hitler, we just got out of a war and he was an evil guy, but he had some pretty good ideas, that guy Hitler. And one of them was the Autobahn. So what we're going to do in this country is we're going to just run roughshod over all the states. We're going to buy eminent domain and create this big network for our military. And by the way, it's going to help the civilians. So do you think that could fly under your definition of what federal government is? And I think
could Eisenhower's highway system fly?
Yeah, because I think that worked out pretty well.
It couldn't happen in that, okay, the Constitution would allow for interstate commerce, which is, and the states couldn't agree on setting up a highway system amongst each other, like say in the New England region, and Well, it has happened now that I listen to myself talk. I heat with natural gas in my South Portland house, and natural gas prices are what they are. The fracking generated supply of natural gas in Pennsylvania, they wanted to pipe it up to Maine, and there was a proposal, it would have been done privately, to put it up through, had to go through Massachusetts and other states to get there. Massachusetts said no, because we don't want to allow that. We believe more in windmills and solar panels than we do in any kind of petroleum product, and so we're not going to allow our state to get dug up and put this pipeline in. Well, okay, so now I have to continue to pay the prices I am. My price would have gone down. Now, that was a failed private venture. If the federal government decided to do it, would they have made it happen, and would that have benefited me? Perhaps. So, yeah, there are drawbacks. You can't, the federal government can impose things, and the Constitution would allow it because it's interstate. And it's related, you could call it regulating interstate commerce. And Article 1 allows for that. So, I don't know, I'm ambivalent about it. But I object to enormous bills like this one that encompass many different kinds of disparate projects, because people, the voters, they watch their congressmen and senators vote yes or no on this, but how many people have a concept of what's in the bill? It's so big. It would have been better had they taken, let's say, okay, the Interstate Commerce and Highway Act, Eisenhower's Highway Act. Your representatives are going to be debating pro and con. This is why I would vote for it. This is why you should vote against it. And watch that debate, educate themselves about it. That doesn't happen anymore. These big bills are just rammed through, and it's so the people can't really keep track of what's happening. I don't like that.
I don't think regular people are any more involved in those big bills than they ever were. I don't think they were involved with the interstate highway. There's just, I think I respect that discussion. I just think it's a little naive to think that people somehow, regular people, are just involved with all these bills. There's always pork in these bills. On both sides, that's what federal government is about.
Yes.
And I guess I would argue is that it's just not that, it's a lot of money, but it's not that much money. With the Trump tax bill, why $3.4 trillion, well, 2.3 or something was added immediately because of the Trump tax cuts. That's what really inflated the deficit under Trump, were the tax cuts.
Right.
So you talk about throwing a pail of tax cuts out that nobody understands, and most of which benefited the rich. And I don't know if you saw that just today, I think, or yesterday, came out with Politico, did this thing kind of outing like the top 50 richest people in the world and how they're not paying any taxes.
Yeah.
Well, some of those things were put in from like for instance, you have to pay, and we talked about capital gains. I know I'm switching gears here, but so let's finish, if we want to go back to that. But well, let me just say this. So how we were talking about capital gains, I think last time around.
Yeah.
And so if you buy a stock for $100 and you sell it for $200, you have to pay a tax on it.
Yeah.
Right. So, but
capital gains.
The capital gains, but under
state and federal.
Yeah, under the Trump, is that if you have a stock that's 100, you buy it for 100, and it's worth 200, and you pass it on to your kids or your state, then that basis starts at $200. Like, you don't have to pay a tax on that. So those are the type of things that keep the rich richer, and under the tax bill. And this whole thing with the Politico story brings up the question, which we were talking about before, and you said, and I agree, if you're Elon Musk, you make a ton of money, you deserve I'm a business guy. I'm an entrepreneur. I started my own business, so I'm in a position where I don't mind talking about, although I'm not a rich guy, but talking about that, what that feels like, because we have a great system. We have a great market system. It allows little people like me to create these little businesses. It allows brilliant people like Elon Musk to create big businesses. But is it fair that our whole taxation system is based on income and not wealth? Because once you start accumulating wealth, you can hide your income. So Jeff Bezos doesn't pay any personal income taxes because instead of getting paid, one is a lot of his wealth is in stock, as we know. But they also can do tricks. Like he can borrow, instead of getting income, he can just borrow money from Amazon. He can just borrow $100 million from Amazon for his personal use. It's just so it's an accounting thing. They don't have to pay taxes. And so I think that gets back to this whole idea of whether, what is fair taxation and adding to the deficit of what Trump did, which goes back to the infrastructure thing, is that for $1 trillion, it's not, I don't think it's that much money when it's spread over, I think it's spread over 8 years. So in terms of what the government spends, to me it's become a political battle and not a battle about the budget or a battle about which infrastructure part do we need. Yes, we need roads and bridges and all that stuff. I mean, is it a bad thing if the government spends or subsidizes 1 million buildings to be retrofitted to be energy efficient? I don't think it's so bad. It creates jobs. We become more energy independent.
Okay, overall, taken on its face, what you said is fine, but what about when it gets down to the details and how this money is going to be spent state to state? Then they want to bring the money home. They want to bring the pork back to their states and then distribute it. And there are Democrat pigs and there are Republican pigs, right? Now, which pigs are going to eat the pork? Are going to actually that metaphor doesn't work. Let's see, which pigs are going to eat this largesse, this money that comes from the feds? Democrat ones or Republican ones, and I have to say, and now you'll dispute this, but I have to say Democrats have a much bigger herd of pigs than Republicans do. Republicans, at least,
used to. I would agree with that in the old days, not so much since George Bush and Trump.
Yeah, well,
and you know that, we know that. But the thing is, you're talking about those earmarks, like the pork thing. I mean, this is what makes this country great, is that we go back and forth all the, because back in, I think it was during the Bush era, where they got rid of the earmarks. Like we had, the reason why we have a tech village down here in Conway is because of a earmark that Greg got, $1 million, I think it was, in Sununu, and not Chris Sununu, but his brother, and when he was congressman. So and they get rid of all the earmarks because that was just, okay, it's pork, right? The bridge to nowhere in Alaska and all that stuff. Yeah. Well, if the political elected officials can't do anything like that, they become insulated, they don't become accountable, because now they can just hide behind voting general bills. So now they're talking about bringing the earmarks back so that so your representatives actually do something for your district or your state.
And you can see it. There it is. And my representative brought that home, and and then can monitor how it's spent, how it's developed. Right. People driving by, okay, I see it getting built. Oh, I see these people leaning on their shovels, whatever. I mean, that's important for people to see it on the ground, day to day, and watch their government at work, whether it's doing well or not doing well. And anyway, and we were arguing about something before. I said, well, Democrats in Maine, their infrastructure projects, they take years, to complete, right? And New Hampshire does them much more quickly. Well, on the way in here, I got delayed in Freiburg in the main infrastructure project on 302, and then I see a brand new one, the bridge in over the little river in Conway, and I guess it would be Center Conway.
You mean this one right here?
Yeah.
The Saco?
They rebuilt the bridge, not the Saco. It's over a tributary of the Saco. And it had just been dug up. I mean, came through here 2 weeks ago, hadn't been dug up. They replaced the bridge, but now they're doing the approaches to the bridge on either side, digging up the road and so forth. Let's see how fast that gets built.
Yeah, but
the one in Freiburg, holy smokes.
Yeah, but it's a big project. Go to Conway Village. Go to Conway Village, Tom. It's like the Freiburg project, where once they do that, then they do everything. They build the sidewalks, they put the pipes in, they fix everything.
Not always. That would be smart if they did everything like that. Yes.
That's what they try to do anyway. That's what they do in Conway Village, and they rebuilt. I mean, they just resurfaced by Walmart and all that, and it's the resurfacing. They put them tar down.
That's easy.
That's easy, right? When they rebuild the road, when they rebuilt all those sections all through North Conway in the aughts, I think it was 2005 and 6, they did all that stuff. It took a whole year to do every section. And you drive it, but from here to Bridgeton, right? They did one of those sections every year for 5 or 6 years. Now it's like the Autobahn out there. It's pretty good. Those Maine, you guys in Maine know how to build a good road.
Well, least that's the way you build a road. I hate to see it. It costs $1 million. Well, it used to be 20 years ago. It cost $1 million a mile to resurface it just with macadam, but then within a year or two, frost heaves have broken it all up again. Have you wasted $1 million on that? I think so. It's better to bite the bullet and spend $10 million or whatever it costs to rebuild the roadbed, put new gravel in, compact it, all that, put in culverts, straighten the road here and there, than it would be to keep spending $1 million a year on
I think what you're saying is that we need an infrastructure bill.
Could be. All right. Let's just get this out of the way and then we can get into other stuff. Okay. Republican state governments across the country are attempting to pass bills they claim will ensure voting integrity. Democrats accuse them of trying to suppress votes of minority voters. In general, do you favor these new bills? That's H.R. 1 is a bill that's running into trouble in the Congress, and that would supplant states from it would basically take over.
Yeah. Well,
these states running their elections, and the federal government would run their elections. And what is it called? The For the People bill or something like that? And I think what it would do is make states adopt the procedures that were abused in the November 2020 election. That is, mail-in ballots, same-day voter registration, voting. If you get your driver's license, you're automatically registered to vote. It would water down accountability in voting, and in lots of other ways other than the ones I just mentioned. And so I don't know if individual states have better bills to do that, because that's how the question is worded about state governments. The long and the short of it is, I think I would leave it to states to do it rather than H.R. 1. Over to you.
Well, I mean, as always, it's interesting. Columnist Bill Marvel has written a couple times, which I agree with, about in New Hampshire, about how, one is that I generally support encouraging and making it possible for more people to vote, whether it's by absentee, whether it's by write-in, whether it's by drop boxes, all the things that can make it easier for people to vote. And we haven't proven widespread fraud. Everybody, except for the certain part of the Republican Party, agrees with that, including Republicans, including William Barr. We had the most participated election in history in 2020, and the safest and cleanest. So, it just wasn't. I mean, it just was. There's no proof. We know that. There's no proof. I know there's proof on YouTube where somebody's, getting up from their chair or something, but there's been none of the Trump lawyers brought any charges of fraud in all those cases. They're all dismissed. They're all procedural. So anyway, unless you believe that, unless you believe in the big lie. And that's another question about what the Republicans are doing. But anyway, so I think there's some legitimate election issues, and one interesting one is in New Hampshire. Because in New Hampshire, UNH students can vote here if they're out of state, right? And this is a Bill Marvel thing, so I'm using not stealing his thunder, but using his example. But it's really true, is that Maggie Hassan beat Kelly Ayotte, our U.S. Senator, by 1,000 votes. And there were like 3,000 or 4,000 UNH kids that voted. Well, they didn't vote for Ayotte, that's for sure. They voted for a Democrat. So you could make the argument, because of what happened in New Hampshire, where Maggie Hassan won by only 1,000 votes, that it changed the whole Senate.
Yeah. So
I agree with that. But on the other stuff, I think that HR 1?
HR 1, yeah.
HR 1, they're saying that they're mandating certain things, like you have to have absentee ballots like prior 15 days. I mean, there's some mechanical things that I don't see any problem with, but I see it as a reaction to what the Republicans are doing. And so after the so-called big lie and the stolen election, there's like hundreds of bills out there in half the states in this country, the red states, and 80% of those bills, those election reform bills, are by Republicans. Well, why is that? It's because at the end of the day, they're trying to suppress the vote.
80% of election reform bills in the Congress.
Well, no, on state level. they're Republican. I mean, these are all. I mean, they're always in Texas. They're in Florida. I mean, it's it's all that stuff. So I think that's wrong. There's not been proof of widespread fraudulent voting anywhere in the Republicans in their political interest, in the way that the Democrats want more people to vote, because the more people vote for Democrats, they're going to tend to be minorities in inner city and all that, so it helps them.
Or illegal immigrants.
Well, I don't think that's enough. Illegal immigrants aren't voting. So, and if I know Trump said that's why Hillary beat him in California, because there were 3 million illegal immigrants voting, but it was never proven. It's just one of those Republican tropes.
You say it's a big lie, and there wasn't widespread fraud.
You believe that, just to understand this, you believe that Trump won the election?
No, I don't.
Okay, just want to get that.
I've already gone over that.
All right, well, because
I almost still, however, for the reasons I'm about to explain, and I believe I don't think I fully explained before, but I said I'm still open to evidence of fraud that I believe could have happened. But because of the narrow time frame, the November election, it was November 3rd or whatever it was of 2020, the inauguration was January of 2.5 months later. So how could there be, if there were a fraud in the state level, and the states run elections, how could the investigation have even started, much less been finished, before the inauguration?
Yeah, but
so quickly afterward? And now, like for example, there's an investigation going on in Georgia, and the results are interesting. The results would seem to indicate pretty widespread fraud, which would indicate that the Democrats did not win that state. Now, I don't know if you've been following that. I have been. And there's hard evidence in the form, like just for one example, the ballots have been saved, and they're shrink wrapped, and they're in a warehouse, so now they're being looked at. And also, countywide, the people who supervise the elections are concurring, that they say, we have this ballot. It was a mail-in ballot, and it's not even wrinkled. And each little oval that's filled in is identical. There happens to be an area of that oval that wasn't completely filled in, enough for the computer to read it, but not really, and in the lower right-hand corner of the oval. And here are 1,700 more ballots exactly like that one. It looks as though they were Xeroxed ballots. So that's just one example of what is being found. And then another county supervisor would say, yeah, I found the same thing in my county. And look at that. It's identical. The oval's identical. So that evidence is only now in that state coming out. Now, if it could have flipped the state of Georgia, how many other states could that have been? So when I said to you that I was open to seeing evidence of fraud and how widespread it was, I hadn't seen any up to that point. I'm seeing it now in Georgia. That's pretty convincing.
Well,
so there you go.
Okay,
now,
there you go. That's. I'm sure that's all over the Republican dark sites out there. But you got to show me the money. In Georgia, they had no, really.
It's a state-run, county-run investigation.
Okay, you got to show it. I mean, you got to show me. I haven't seen it in the Wall Street Journal.
You're not going to read it in the New York Times.
No, you're not going to read it in the Wall Street Journal. You're not going to read it in the New York Post, because it's a bunch of crap. I mean, it really is. You know,
okay, it's a bunch of. How do you don't even know about it, and you're saying it's a bunch of crap?
I have faith. I have faith in our institutions, Tom. The Georgia recount, they had 2 recounts, and they had paper ballot backups, and they counted them. And then Trump paid for a 3rd recount in Georgia, and it didn't show up anything.
It didn't change anything. No,
of course. So that means that's all. Okay, wait a minute. So then you have the Georgia governor, and you have the Georgia Secretary of State Rothenberger. No, I think Rothenberger is the quarterback for the Pittsburgh Pirates. Who's the state Secretary of State who's now running for governor? They're Republicans, and they're saying that it's a safe election. Local elections are just highly monitored by both parties in every state. Now, are there they found some guy in Madison who voted twice, once here and once in Massachusetts. They found a few others here and there, but in terms of widespread voting fraud, you got to show me the money.
Okay,
all right,
I understand. I have the same opinion. I want to see the evidence. Okay, I think the evidence that's emerging now in Georgia is convincing that, yeah, this could have happened, and it's corroborated by several different county supervisors
What's
are seeing the same thing.
Look what's happening in Arizona. Is it Arizona or Nevada? It's Arizona with the cyber.
Arizona's doing something. I haven't
ninja,
kept track of what
right.
Arizona is doing, but they're conducting some sort of an investigation.
Well, with this company called Cyber Ninjas, Cyber Ninja, and and they're looking for, what is it? They're looking for threads of bamboo in the ballots, because one of the theories is that somehow China brought in these fake ballots, and the ballots are made out of bamboo. I mean, the crazy stuff. And then about chickens eating the ballots. I mean, it's just the craziest stuff.
I've read about the machines that count those ballots and some of the software used in those machines. That I've heard about. And looking at that also in Arizona, but beyond that, I don't really know what it is that they are investigating in Arizona. I've read that it's been going on, and we'll see what happens.
We'll see what happens. I mean, it's also, Trump is supposed to be reinstated in August too. We'll see if that happens.
Well, that is bizarre. Now, I read that from what I consider a reputable source, a National Review reporter named Charles C.W. Cook. He's a sharp guy. I don't know if you ever heard of him. And he just wrote a piece yesterday about Trump. He said, I have, at my personal contacts in Washington, there are Republicans who claim that Trump really does expect to be able to be reinstated this summer. Now,
he's loco.
That is dangerous. That is dangerous stuff. If that is what Trump is doing, do I think that is a plausible accusation? Yes. I mean, given my understanding of Donald Trump and how I read him, I would think, that's a possibility.
That he believes it.
Yes. And there's nothing in government. I mean, we've gone back to what Nixon did, for example, in 1960, when there was evidence that showed up that it was a close election between him and Kennedy, and evidence showed up in Chicago that there was shenanigans going on, and Nixon, rather than pursue it, said, look at what it would do to the country if I were to pursue that. And he just fell on the sword.
Look what Gore did.
Yes, Gore is another example. So, would Trump do that? No, he wouldn't. It's not in him, I don't think. So that's too bad.
Now, you're very conservative, obviously, but you're also rational. So how is it that if you can see this and say that it just seems a little disturbing that a former president think he actually believes he's going to be reinstated? How do you account for what's happening with the general Republican Party in the split? Do you think Trump really still has that power? And is he going to get out on the campaign trail this summer for the 2022 midterms? I mean, when do you think the bubble's going to break? Who's going to stick a pin in it?
It's like when the evidence was coming out about Watergate, and Republican leaders went to Nixon, and they said, you're going to be impeached. And there were senators, Hugh Scott and a few others, that would have been voting in the trial had he been impeached.
Goldwater, I think, was one of them, wasn't he?
Maybe so. Yeah. And said, look, we're going to vote guilty based on the evidence that we've seen so far. And so, for the good of the country, you need to resign. And he did. Now, Nixon was open to that. Now, that's the second time he did something like that. Right? He did it in 1960, as I just said, and now here again in 73, I think that occurred. So, will Trump be amenable to being approached by other Republican leaders and say, yeah, that you're right, my love of the country will, I'll let it happen, and I won't interfere because of the damage it would do? I don't see him doing that. Well, his ego is too big.
Right, it's not even ego. It's kind of like trying to get Hitler to change. You know, hey, you just invaded the West. Why don't
That's
we
taking it a little too far.
No, I don't
the
mean
Hitler
But,
analogy.
what I'm saying is that those type of people, those force of natures, I'll say that in a positive way. But those people, nobody's going to convince Hitler, hey, it's not a good idea to invade Russia. Guess what? Be happy with Western Europe, right? It ain't going to happen. So Trump, it's not about
I'm
Trump.
sure people tried to do that.
Yeah, and Trump is going to just stay. He's been this way since he was 5. So and Roy Cohen was his protege. He was a protege of Roy Cohen. I mean, he is that person which got him as far as he did, even though some of it was through nefarious and negative ways. But that's not, to me, the interesting part is Mitch McConnell and the rest of the Republicans. Like, they're not even going to Trump. Never mind Trump stepping down if he was approached. They're not going to him. On February 13th or whenever it was this year, McConnell's out there saying that, Trump was practically and morally responsible for the insurrection. He said that. Yeah. And now they're just totally backing off.
McConnell's backing off that statement?
Yeah, he's just ducking it. He just said he was just asked the other day
about... I didn't hear that.
Yeah, well, he said because I know what it was, because the Senate report, because we also know that the Republicans wouldn't allow a commission to study the insurrection, right. So that's another story. But they scrubbed the Senate report. The only way they could get it out is the Republicans demanded that the word insurrection was taken out of the report.
Yeah.
So someone asked McConnell just the other day when this came out, well, do you call it an insurrection? And he says, I've already said what I'm going to say on it. So in other words, the point is that you talk about Goldwater and those people going to Nixon. No, then the Republicans aren't going to Trump. They're not facing him. They're not standing up to him.
We don't know that.
Well, they're not.
We only knew that in hindsight after it happened. Nixon resigned. So, something popped into my head
who are those?
You were talking.
Who are those brave souls in the Republican Party who are willing to do that now? Maybe Mitch.
I'm not going to speculate on that, but when you brought up the investigation into the January 6th incident, right. There was an interesting, I saw an interesting piece about 105, where's 205? Several Republican senators, might be these guys, Cruz, I forget who else. There's four others that have sent a letter to President Biden, who's pushing for his administration, maybe not him personally, pushing for an investigation into January 6th, saying, how about an investigation into the riots of last summer, or the events in Portland, Oregon, and in Seattle, Washington, and an Antifa and Black Lives Matter role in those. It would want at least a parallel investigation if you're going to investigate January 6th. I think that was what they're after. I have some wording about it, but I should have. I don't remember exactly where I put it. Huh. I don't know where my notes went. Did I fall on the floor? Well, sorry, but yeah, and they made, I think, a convincing case that there was more damage. And I told you, insurance companies reported more damage in those riots than all the riots in '64, in '68, in '92, that were race riots or whatever, in all of our cities, because adjusted for inflation, there was more damage to property from those riots last summer. So, but they're minimized by Democrats because it doesn't reflect well on them. And they're going to, of course, play up January 6th, call it an insurrection. Trump was trying to, overturn the government. And, yeah, there's evidence that he was trying to do that. And that's the serious thing. But so was Antifa, so were Black Lives Matter trying to do that in their efforts last summer, all across the country, not just in one place.
Well, I'm not going to defend violence. I'm not going to defend all the damage that you said at all. I think you just can't. You're just mixing apples and oranges completely.
Why?
There should be a national. You're saying there should be a national commission into what happened in Portland, not a state issue in Portland, Oregon. You think there should be a national commission for that? And the other thing is that over the whole country. Those, in particular, Seattle, Washington, and Portland is where they began and then spread all over the country. But I would into
Black Lives Matter into Antifa. And who's behind them?
Well, then we should also have a national commission into looking into the Proud Boys and all on the right wing militia too. I mean, part of it is just you're comparing apples and oranges. Yes, the damage was obviously I didn't know that. I don't doubt what you're saying about the amount of dollar damage, but that reflection on how widespread these demonstrations were. I mean, there were millions and millions. There were thousands and thousands and thousands of demonstrations. We had 100 I don't know how many we had in New Hampshire. We had 4 or 5 in Conway, so I'm sure we had 100 or so demonstrations, Black Lives Matter demonstrations and protests in New Hampshire. There were thousands and thousands across the country. There were millions and millions and millions of people involved. Probably 90% of them participated by white people, just like the anti-war demonstrations were back in the 60s. They tend to be middle class, upper middle class, liberal white people who participated in those events. So there's a difference. Yes, there was damage and all that, but it's in one sense there's not much to tell. It got out of control, there was damage, and now you see even people like the mayor in Portland saying we're not going to allow that to happen again.
Were they instigated is the question, and they are
Well,
political in nature.
It's a combination.
They're political in nature
we
that
know
are
that.
they're aimed at overturning government. If you
They-
call January 6th an
No.
insurrection, then you could use those same principles and call the riots in our cities insurrections as well. Because if you look at what Black Lives Matter's agenda is,
Well-
rather than the spin that's out there now, I mean, it's you say I'm anti-black in some of our correspondence.
I said your columns are.
And my columns well, I wrote them. So if I wrote them and I believed them, does that make me anti-black as well? Now, what you did was, I attacked it politically. I said they have a political agenda to emphasize what happened to George Floyd as if white cops are the problem. Racist white cops want to kill young black men. But in the meantime, every single weekend you have young black men getting shot by other young black men. And 10 of them are going to die. 40 of them are shot, 10 dead. Every weekend in Chicago. And then you can look at LA, you can look at Baltimore, you can look at other cities and see similar statistics. No emphasis on that. The young black men, the problem is other young black men, not racist white cops. But to say that I'm anti-black, or my columns are anti-black to make that point, please. You know, you say racism as if that is going to...
I said your columns are anti-black. We had this was a private email discussion, and you said I accused you of being racist or something, and I said I didn't.
I didn't.
I said if you write about...
You certainly hinted at it.
Well, if you write... I said your columns are anti-black. Everything you've ever written about black racial matters have been anti-black.
It's not anti-black.
Well, it's defending...
They haven't got anything...
You said there was no systemic racism. You said the Antifa is behind these millions and millions and millions of people who've been demonstrating this last summer, most of whom were white. That's all Antifa inspired.
I didn't say that either. I said that the riots in our cities were Antifa sponsored. That's what I said. Now you're putting words in my mouth. You're claiming I said things that I did not say. And yes, because I talked about things, I went against the Democrat and media agenda on racism, that I am therefore anti-black. I was saying that these people exploit racism to further their agenda.
Okay,
I'm not anti-black.
You could say that, but you also said you wrote many columns, or a few, about how there's no systemic racism.
I wrote one.
You wrote about the column about how racism had nothing to do with Democrats the conservatives turning from Democrat to Republicans. I mean, that's just not recognizing racism as a big part of our
I didn't say it had nothing to do with it.
Well,
I said that it had something to do. It had very little to do with it.
You said other reasons that didn't even. You said it didn't even. I don't remember. You said it didn't even start till like Reagan or something about the shift from the Democrats to the Republicans to conservatives. But anyway, we're discussing things that people don't know about. I just don't think you can compare as bad as those riots were. It was like saying the anti-war riots in the 60s were all fomented by the SDS and those radical groups that wanted to blow up buildings. Well, they weren't. Most of those demonstrations in the 60s, as we know, they were mostly just white kids who were against the war. So huge percentage, majority of people who are demonstrating were trying to demonstrate to correct what they saw were injustices. That's what they were trying to do. Yes, Antifa was part of that, I'm sure. They were in neighborhoods, and there's always hoodlums that take over riots. It just happens, But that's different than the President of the United States encouraging the Vice President to take over the country, and stop the transfer of power. That's a totally different ballgame. And if you don't recognize that,
I recognize that, and
okay.
I have said that, but I recognize that is what was in Trump's mind. Yes, I didn't believe it at first, but then John Burroughs showed me a series of tweets that went with his statements.
Right.
That he tweeted this at 9 a.m. After making this statement, at 8:55, then he tweeted, which indicated this is what he was really thinking for making this statement. So that persuaded me. Yes, Trump was. Fomenting this.
I'm just saying that's just a much more dangerous thing than any sort of domestic riot.
It was a one-time thing.
One time.
In one place in Washington D.C. on January 6th. He made the statement and out there in the White House lawn, and then there was that demonstration down the Pennsylvania Avenue to the Capitol, and it was over.
It wasn't over. For months and months, until the election was over, he denied the election. He set it up by saying, if I lose, I'm not going to accept the election results. And he's still doing it. He's still trying to totally disrupt and take over and overthrow a democratic country. And you don't think that's a big deal?
All right, so you make a point about saying that the election was stolen from me. Now, I don't see that there's evidence enough that the election was stolen from him.
Okay.
However, I am open that it could have been, and if I see evidence, then I could be convinced, rather than for you to call it a big lie.
It is.
You're completely closed to
I'm not
any
completely
evidence.
close. I'm just being realistic, Tom. They've been, since when? How come the Republicans weren't challenging the 2016 election when Trump won by a little bit? Now that he lost by a little bit, now you're challenging
Hillary Clinton challenged it.
She didn't challenge it.
Not officially, she didn't.
I see,
but she made lots of statements afterward,
but
much the way Trump made statements after last November's election.
Did she concede the election?
Yes.
Okay.
She did. And did Trump concede?
No.
No, I don't think he did.
Right.
No.
So that's a dangerous. Liz Cheney says what Trump did, and it's not just a one-day event. He set it up. He's done this forever. He said in Des Moines that Ted Cruz stole the Iowa primary from him. He said that he didn't lose the popular vote to Hillary when he won in 2016. This has been his thing all the time, and it's undermining democracy.
I won by more electoral votes than anybody in history.
Liz Cheney says it's the most dangerous act that a president's ever done, and I agree with it.
Okay. Liz Cheney said that?
Yeah.
I like her.
Yeah, she's conservative, turns out. What else you got?
Happened to my
We must be getting close.
Bill, how much time do we have?
12.
12 minutes. Kamala Harris is in Central America. She said, do not come. You must have seen that, right? Okay. That was funny. I mean, it wasn't really funny because to go down there and say, do not come, after campaigning as she did in the Democrat primaries, if you come, we'll let you in. And then she's vice president to Joe Biden, who undid everything Trump did at the border. Trump said, you're not coming in. You can stay at the border if you want to, but you're not going to be allowed in. If you want to apply for asylum, you have to do it there, or you have to do it from your own country. You're not going to come in. And what the result of those policies was a drastic decline in the number of Central Americans or anybody else coming up to the border.
It's not true.
No,
if you look at the chart, there are more people coming through now and trying to get in than ever. But if you look at 2018, there was a huge spike. Remember all those caravans in 2018?
Yes, I do.
There we go.
And they stopped.
Who was it?
Yeah. They stopped because Trump's policies started to become implemented, and the word went out all over Guatemala and Honduras and El Salvador and those places. You can make it up to the border. Jose did, and his family, they did, and they couldn't get in. And then that word goes back, and it stops. And that is what happened. And then Biden gets in, and he just undid that. I think in his first week, he said, now if you come, you're going to be allowed in. And they are being allowed in. And now it's surging again. Okay? So now for Kamala Harris to go down there and say, you can go up there if you want, but don't come. that is so hypocritical. She knows better than, and she wouldn't even dare go to the border. She goes to these other countries instead and holds press conferences.
Did you see that what Lester Holt asked her?
Yeah, I did.
It was funny.
That was pathetic.
Yeah, she didn't look good. She said they asked her about, he was pressing her in an interview about whether she actually went to the border. And she just tried to circumvent it. And he finally said, yeah, but did you actually go to the border? And her answer was, well, I haven't been to Europe either.
I saw that.
Yeah, that's pretty funny.
It was she.
Yeah. But anything that I've read so far.
And what she did by saying don't come. I mean, she had a script and she didn't screw it up. She didn't do her crazy giggly laugh, and she did it. It came off well, right? Except unless you know what Biden did, and did Biden say now all of a sudden, I'm going to allow all these illegal immigrants from all over the world to come in across the Mexican border? He didn't say that, but he had to have known. If he had to have known. How come I knew that that's what the result would be? Everyone who watches the border knows that that is what the result would be, and certainly it was. And for her to go, don't come. Of course they're going to come. They're going to come because the relatives and friends that are telling them, yeah, you can go right in, you can walk right across and get on a bus and be shipped to someplace else in the country. And that is what's happening.
Well, I've read criticisms from Democrats of the Biden administration. Biden said don't come. She went down there. She looked pretty lame. I have to admit, she looked pretty lame, saying don't come. But the criticism that I've read is that what's happened is nothing. Is that the Biden administration is basically continuing the Trump policies. And the reason is because it's a big friggin' mess. It was a big friggin' mess. Remember, they called Obama deporter-in-chief. So he was probably the one who was most successful at it. And Trump built a stupid wall, but they don't need a wall because they're all coming through the main gate. They're just trying to get in, right? All these kids. So, I think it's a huge issue, obviously. And,
oh, yeah.
And I don't think, unless you have statistics, but anything that I've read from Democrats criticizing Biden is that he hasn't done anything. Like he hasn't changed the Trump policies down there because it's a mess.
Of course he's changed the Trump policies. You couldn't get in before, now you can. You couldn't walk across the border. Well, some people did. They would go through deserts and places where the border is not.
I didn't know that. I didn't know they literally opened the borders and there's no border control anymore?
They're allowed in. If they come in and they say, I want asylum, I'm leaving because,
They've let hundreds of thousands of people in already?
Yes.
Huh, I didn't know that.
They have, yes.
Yeah, I'd like to see that citation.
Probably won't find that in the New York Times.
I won't find it in the Wall Street Journal or New York Post.
You keep saying the Wall Street Journal.
Well, they're conservative.
As if, okay, that's strictly a conservative publication. I don't see that way. I subscribe to the New York. I dropped my subscription. I still have that. I can still read New York. I still have subscriptions to both online. And
I'm glad you're supporting journalism.
Yeah.
Better than Newsmax.
But I don't like Newsmax. I tried to watch their show.
That was a good, oh, by the way, we have a few minutes. I thought it was really fascinating about your suggestion to go to, what's it called, DuckDuckGo or Go Duck?
Yeah.
And you said, your thesis is that Google and those guys are all a bunch of liberals and you're screening out the conservatives, right?
Yeah.
So Tom said, what was the story you asked?
Tom who?
You, Tom. I'm talking to the viewers here. You said, go to the search engine called, what's it called?
DuckDuckGo.
DuckDuckGo. So it's another search. What do we got? So it's
another. See Joanne is going.
Okay, so it's a search engine. So Tom asked me to go there to look up a certain story. Oh, it's about Fauci, about Fauci lying. So I just go and do a Google search and it's DuckDuckGo. And what I notice is that the first 10 things that come up
are conservative publications.
All conservatives.
That's right.
But DuckDuckGo, when you look at them, when you look at the Wikipedia or whatever, they're a neutral site. They're a neutral site. They don't consider themselves conservatives. They're just a platform.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So how is it that those first come up, as those 10 come up?
I'm not sure. You asked me that in an email.
I know why.
Okay, why?
It's the same thing that happens with Google and Amazon. That if you have 100 people that go and they look at and they go to Amazon or they go to Amazon and look at a certain pair of shoes, those pair of shoes come to the top because those are the most popular ones. And Amazon says, oh, they're the most popular, therefore we're going to show people first. It's all algorithms. So in Google's case, if people are looking and they find liberals information, they tend to come up to the top. So on this DuckDuckGo, which apparently conservatives go to because they don't believe in Google, then what happens is they're looking at the conservative stuff. So
Okay.
because the conservative stuff is getting more traffic, when
Okay.
just some schmo like me goes to DuckDuckGo and puts in Fauci, all the conservative stuff comes
Yeah,
up. I don't
okay.
consider DuckDuckGo a conservative website. I'm just saying that the algorithms feed me that because those are the most important sites that people have looked at. That's how it works.
That you can say that's how it works, and you don't believe that algorithms can be manipulated so as to screen out.
Oh, I think they could be.
And I believe they are. You don't believe they
So
are.
DuckDuckGo screens out the liberal stuff.
It's possible. I don't know. It's possible they do.
I don't
But
think they
I believe that Google and Facebook and Twitter, they do.
Okay. I mean, Facebook banned Trump. So, I mean, you can make a case that that's a liberal, bias against Trump.
Why would they do so?
Because they have a policy against sedition. They've eliminated.
Okay, but it's okay to run
you can disagree with it.
Iranian radical Muslim stuff, but not Donald Trump.
I know they've taken off Iranian Muslim radical stuff too. They've taken off thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of people off Facebook for all kinds of reasons. And the fact they do it to the president, frankly, surprised me because he's the freaking president. But that's their policy. I'm just saying that in a general, I guess I'm just debunking this idea that everything has politics behind it because of the DuckDuckGo. I believe DuckDuckGo is a neutral thing. It happens to be dominated by conservatives. Therefore, when you go there, you're going to get conservative
If
information.
I'm looking for a particular thing that I know occurred, and I read somewhere in some conservative publications that this less than such occurred, and then I want to go back and look for more about it, and I use Google, I'm not going to find it. It's not going to come up. I'll go to 3 or 4 pages of citations. And beyond that, it's just tiresome to go because they start repeating. And so I don't go there. But if I go to DuckDuckGo, I'm more likely to find it on page 1.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't agree with that because that's where the conservatives go.
And that,
Because that's why it comes up. Google, your thing that you're looking for is probably on page 52.
so in order for what you claim to be true, then only liberals tend to go, a vast majority of the people that go to Google tend to be left of center.
No, I'm just saying that you're not going to, if you go to Google and you put in Fauci, the first 10 things that are going to come up aren't about how he supposedly lied.
We didn't even get to Fauci.
How he supposedly lied. Where that will happen on there.
Do you know about
DuckDuckGo.
Fauci's? Do you know about Fauci's emails, for example? Speaking of this, okay.
And let me ask you in general, why is Fauci such a threat to the Republicans? Why is he the bad boy now?
I would say Fauci has. Well, let me say. I want to say this. Fauci and the NIH were responsible for distributing annually $32 billion in research grants. That gives him enormous power.
How much did he send to China to the Wuhan facility?
He didn't personally through NIH. NIH gave money to a third party, which then gave it to the
How
Wuhan
much money
lab.
was that?
It was about between $4 and $6 million, I think.
I'd read that it was 120,000.
Okay.
It's not much. But why is,
The
let me
point
just in
is
general,
that
why is Fauci such a bad guy?
Fauci controls what research, Fauci and the NIH. Now, I can't say that he personally says, give this institution money, give that institution money. But I know that they distribute over $30 billion annually to scientists, to colleges and universities for research. Research this instead of that. Research this hypothesis instead of that hypothesis. He was saying that at first the virus, well, masks, for example, don't bother wearing masks. They don't do anything.
He
okay?
said that medical people should wear them first, but and science evolves.
And then science evolves.
Science
Okay.
evolves. I mean, it was the early days,
How does science evolve? By doing research, right? Who funds the research? His agency that he ran for decades. Right? They fund the research. So you're not going to.
What are you saying? I don't understand what you're saying. I mean,
What I'm saying is, if you're going to get funded for research, you have to apply for a grant. And so, okay, you apply for the grant. I'm going to research this. If there's a political dynamic in that funding, in that grant, you're not going to get it. I learned this in education grants. Okay, you're not going to get it because they want you to research this over here, not that over there.
So even
That
though
doesn't- that's not
even
part
though
of
the
the
national
agenda.
health has been around,
We've got to talk about this when we have more
forever,
time. We're out of time.
But you're saying that even though Fauci's been there through like 5 administrations, whichever they're always dominated by Democrats in there. Is that what you're saying?
The deep state runs things.
Okay,
Yes.
sure, of course.
Yes. Okay, we're out of time, folks. But this, I want to talk about this grant research.
Well, you don't have me on very
Continue.
much, so
Not anymore.
Fauci will be retired by the time I'm back.
Yeah, maybe so. Well, we'll see. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, Tom.
All right. See you next time, whenever that is. All right. Good night, folks.